Imagine that a human being consists of three interconnected parts. We usually think of ourselves as a single, unified person. But in reality, we're made up of three distinct components that constantly interact with one another. The first is the body. The body is the physical part of us, the part you can touch. It moves, reacts, and functions for as long as we're alive. Think of the body as the hardware of a computer. Let's use that analogy because it's simple and easy to visualize. The body is the hardware. Like computers, hardware has evolved over time. The earliest computers were enormous, huge machines with punch cards and primitive technology. Living organisms evolved in much the same way. If we think about dinosaurs, they were like those first-generation machines, massive, relatively simple, and equipped with only the basic mechanisms needed to survive. Over the years, both computers and living organisms became smaller, more efficient, and more sophisticated. Today, the closest living descendants of those ancient reptiles are creatures like lizards and newts. One of the oldest parts of the nervous system is what we call the reptilian brain. You can think of the brain as developing in layers. First come the basic spinal reflexes, then the reptilian brain. Above that, the limbic system, and finally, consciousness. So first we have the hardware. Next, that hardware needs software. Let's call that software the soul. Just as a computer can only run software that its hardware is capable of supporting, our biological hardware determines what kind of software it can carry. Now we have both hardware and software. What's still missing? Power. A computer doesn't work unless it's connected to a stable source of energy. Too much power creates problems. Too little power creates problems too. If the voltage drops, the computer freezes. Our bodies work in much the same way. The quality and stability of our energy supply determine how well the entire system functions. So now we have hardware, software, and energy. Finally, there's consciousness. Consciousness is the user sitting in front of the computer. It uses the software that's installed in the hardware. And how that user treats the computer has a huge impact on how long the system lasts. The remarkable thing about the human body is that it generates its own energy. Imagine a computer with its own digestive system, its own power plant, and its own internal energy distribution network. That's essentially what our digestive system does. Our gastrointestinal tract constantly produces and distributes the energy that keeps the whole system running. So we have hardware, software, an internal power source, and a user. In human terms, those are the body, the soul, and consciousness. The part of us that thinks, makes decisions, and directs everything else. Now let's talk about biological life. Every day, our body is constantly adapting. It adjusts to changes in the weather, changes in the environment, changes in society, and changes in our relationships with other people. All of this happens continuously, in real time. Because if we fail to adapt, our survival is threatened. How does the body let us know what it needs? Through countless built-in signals. We feel hunger, thirst, fear. We want shade when it's hot, sunlight when we're cold. We feel the urge to walk, run, jump, or sleep. These are all internal guidance systems, They're constantly monitoring both the outside world and what's happening inside our body, adjusting our behavior accordingly. Some of these responses are simple reflexes. Others are instincts. The instinct for self-preservation, the instinct to reproduce, territorial instinct, the instinct to protect and care for our children. That's why, when a child is born, parents suddenly experience an overwhelming desire to care for and protect that little human being. These are fundamental biological programs. There are only a handful of basic instincts, although each one branches into many different forms. But then there's the user, consciousness. And consciousness has its own priorities. It has ambitions, goals, social expectations. Very often, those priorities have little to do with what's actually best for the body. The body is hungry, but there's an important meeting. The body wants to sleep, but work comes first. The body needs a break, but everyone else is still sitting there, so you stay seated too. You're exhausted, but you have to look energetic. You'd like to sleep in after the weekend, but Monday morning doesn't wait. So day after day, we force ourselves to meet social expectations. I have to. I must. It's my responsibility. My career depends on it. Gradually, we stop listening to the body's signals. The body becomes little more than a tool for achieving our goals. Society also teaches us to suppress negative emotions. You're uncomfortable, but you don't show it. Something hurts, but you smile anyway. You're anxious, but you hide it. In other words, the user begins forcing the system to operate according to social demands instead of biological needs. And that's where the problems begin. Animals, a wolf, a rabbit, or any other wild animal, are fundamentally symmetrical. The right hemisphere of the brain controls the left side of the body, while the left hemisphere controls the right. That's simply how the nervous system is wired. When an animal moves, it alternates its limbs naturally, left, right, left, right. As it grows, both sides of its body develop evenly. Humans, however, don't just walk and run. We perform thousands of one-sided activities every day. Some people write with their right hand, others with their left. Some play tennis right-handed. Others play left-handed. A surgeon operates with one dominant hand. A mechanic favors one side. Even something as simple as brushing your teeth or shaving usually relies on the same hand over and over again. As a result, one side of the body and one hemisphere of the brain receives far more training and stimulation than the other. Over time, one side becomes dominant, while the other is used much less. Imagine that the dominant hemisphere has a capacity of 100 units, while the weaker side functions at only 80. Whenever life becomes demanding, and modern life is almost always demanding, which side do you think we rely on? Of course, we use our strongest side. It's more efficient, more capable, more reliable. Every challenge reinforces that same pattern, and because that side is used more often, it also receives better blood supply, stronger neural connections, and even greater functional development. The stronger side keeps getting stronger. The weaker side falls further behind. The imbalance gradually increases. Now let's look at those numbers differently. If we treat the stronger side, 100 units, as the standard, then the weaker side appears to function at only 80%. We might conclude that it's underdeveloped. But suppose we reverse our perspective. Let's call the 80-unit side normal. Now the 100-unit side becomes 120%. Instead of saying one side is weak, we'd say the other side is overdeveloped. It's the same imbalance, just viewed from a different angle. The important point isn't which side is stronger. The important point is that balance has been lost. And that imbalance continues to grow throughout life. Now think about it from the body's perspective. The organism constantly monitors itself. It asks a very simple question. Why is one side working so much harder than the other? Imagine a rabbit whose right side was significantly stronger than its left. It wouldn't be able to run in a straight line. Or imagine a wolf whose left side overpowered the right. It would constantly drift off course. Animals couldn't survive that way. Nature demands symmetry. Humans, however, can hide these imbalances remarkably well. Even when we don't feel well, we cover it up. We put on makeup. We smile. We tell ourselves, I'm fine. My stomach hurts, I'll take something for it. My face looks puffy. Maybe I'll take a diuretic. Instead of asking why the symptoms appeared, we simply suppress them and keep going. We don't have time to be sick. We don't have time to recover. Work comes first. Deadlines come first. Career comes first. Money comes first. Life becomes an endless race. And while we're busy chasing success, the imbalance inside us continues to grow. Deep within the unconscious parts of the brain, every one of these patterns is being recorded. From the body's point of view, something doesn't make sense. The body has only one mission: to keep us alive for as long as possible. When it realizes something is wrong, it begins sending warning signals. At first, those signals are subtle. A little discomfort, a little pain, a bit of anxiety, persistent fatigue, a sense of sadness, loss of motivation. People describe it as apathy. I don't feel like doing anything. I don't have any energy. But instead of listening, we push ourselves even harder. The body is trying to communicate. It's saying, you're moving in the wrong direction. It's no different from the warning lights on a car's dashboard. Each symptom is simply another indicator that something requires attention. But rather than addressing the cause, we try to silence the warning. We pride ourselves on our willpower. I can push through. I'll deal with it later. I'm stronger than this. And so we ignore the signals. Eventually, medications become part of the routine. A stimulant during the day, something to calm down at night. Then another pill to help with sleep. But even in bed, the mind won't switch off. The day's conversations replay over and over. I should have answered differently. I should have handled that meeting better. I should have looked more confident. Endless mental rehearsals begin. One thought triggers another. Old memories resurface. Random songs get stuck in your head. Childhood experiences suddenly reappear. Questions start multiplying. Did we hire the right person? Should I have fired someone? What did my boss really mean? What are my colleagues thinking about me? The mind never stops running. And remember, this entire process is happening in an already imbalanced brain. The dominant hemisphere keeps taking control, working harder, thinking faster, consuming more resources, while the weaker side contributes less and less. The imbalance continues to grow. Now let's go back to our power source, the energy that keeps the entire system running. Under normal conditions, the brain uses about 20% of the body's total energy. That's its normal allocation. Every organ has its own energy budget. The liver has 1, the kidneys have 1, the immune system has 1. Every tissue in the body is allocated the energy it needs to function properly. Think of it as a carefully balanced distribution system. Now imagine what happens when the brain becomes chronically overactive. Instead of using 20% of the body's energy, it starts demanding 30%, then 40%. In extreme cases, it can consume 60 or even 70% of the body's available energy. That extra energy has to come from somewhere. The brain doesn't create more energy. It simply redirects it, which means other systems receive less than they need. From the brain's point of view, that's perfectly logical. After all, consciousness is in charge. It's the part making the decisions. As far as it's concerned, the body exists to serve its goals. Of course, the body tries to push back. It sends warning signals: pain, fatigue, anxiety, loss of energy. But instead of listening, we suppress those signals. There's always a pharmacy around the corner. There's always another pill. Someone tells us to work harder. A coach says we need more discipline. A psychologist encourages us to push through. Family members remind us of our responsibilities. You promised. You have to. People are counting on you. At work, there are deadlines. Business partners, competitors. People constantly pushing from behind. The pressure never really stops. This is what we call chronic social stress. Every major event becomes stressful. Negotiating a deal is stressful. Not having any deals is stressful. Closing a successful deal is stressful. Losing a deal is stressful. It almost doesn't matter what happens. The nervous system remains under constant pressure, and most people keep all of that tension inside. But perhaps the most important thing is this. After a while, they get used to it. Stress stops feeling unusual. It becomes their normal state. That's when the real problems begin. Then one day, a crisis occurs. A stroke. From the brain's perspective, it's a catastrophic event. Instantly, the person is removed from normal social life, but they don't fully understand what's happened yet. Their first thought is often, "I need to get back to work." Meanwhile, life outside doesn't stop. At the office, people are asking, "What do we do now? The manager is gone. The owner's in the hospital. Who's going to sign the documents? Who's making the decisions?" Business doesn't simply pause. Everything is waiting for that one person. But inside the body, an entirely different crisis is unfolding. One side of the face has drooped. Speech is impaired. An arm no longer moves. A leg won't support weight. The nervous system has broken down, yet the person's goals haven't disappeared. They still have unfinished plans, deadlines, responsibilities, projects they were determined to complete. Modern life doesn't slow down on its own. It keeps demanding more and more. Medicine now steps in. And from a medical standpoint, there's another issue to consider. Can this person work? Medicine classifies people as either fit for work, temporarily unable to work, or permanently disabled. Those are the practical categories. But the patient usually has a very different priority. I don't have time to be sick. I need treatment so I can get back to work. What happens next depends entirely on how that rehabilitation is approached. If we focus only on restoring function without changing the person's lifestyle, stress level, or daily habits, we're simply preparing them to return to the same conditions that caused the problem in the first place. The patient says, "I need my hand back. I have to sign documents. I need my speech back. I have to lead meetings. I need my leg back. I have to get back to work." So everyone focuses on restoring those functions as quickly as possible. And if we're not careful, we send the person straight back into the very environment that overwhelmed their nervous system. The result? A second stroke. The first stroke may have been relatively mild. The second is often much more severe. The third may be fatal, or it leaves the person with profound neurological damage. At that point, They may no longer recognize family members. Speech may be almost completely gone. Movement becomes severely limited. They can no longer return to the life they once had. From a biological perspective, however, the body has accomplished exactly what it set out to do. It preserved life. It simply disconnected the person from the circumstances that were destroying them. The social identity, the career, the responsibilities, the constant pressure, all of that has effectively been switched off. And if you leave that person alone, if you don't force them back into the same stressful environment, they may live another 10, 15, or even 20 years. The important thing is not to push them back into the life that made them ill. Unfortunately, that's often exactly what happens. Rehabilitation focuses on restoring movement, but not restoring balance, function, but not physiology. The person returns to the same work, the same schedule, the same stress, the same lifestyle. Nothing fundamentally changes. Even in the intensive care unit, people may come asking for signatures. Business associates want decisions. Family members bring stressful news. Did you hear what happened? The company is struggling. The market has changed. Everyone's waiting for you. Even the television keeps feeding the brain with more anxiety, politics, crises, wars, economic uncertainty. Every one of those messages pulls the brain back into the same stress response. And that's exactly what increases the risk of another stroke. By the time patients come to us, many have already survived one, sometimes even two strokes. Their families no longer expect them to return to running a company or building a career. Now they have a different wish. We don't need a businessman. We don't need a CEO. We just want our father back, our mother, our grandfather. We'll take care of everything else. We just want them to stay alive. That completely changes the goal of rehabilitation. The first step is to understand what has already been done. Then we begin rebuilding the system from the inside out. First, we restore balance. Then we normalize the body's energy distribution. Only after that do we work on neurological recovery. The brain should no longer consume far more energy than the rest of the body. It has to return to its normal share. Around 20%, not 40, not 60. While the brain was monopolizing the body's resources, every other system paid the price. The liver, the kidneys, the immune system, the joints, the spine. Many chronic problems had simply been masked with medication rather than resolved. Now those systems also need to recover. That's why our goal isn't simply to repair the brain. Our goal is to restore the body's entire internal balance. Patients often ask, "Can I watch the news?" No. "Can I call work?" No. "I just want to know who's replacing me." No. Because every one of those thoughts pulls them back into the same pattern that contributed to the stroke. Our job is to break that pattern completely. Sometimes that even means changing their environment, moving them away from the office, away from constant reminders of work, away from the identity that kept them under relentless pressure. Only then can true recovery begin. First, we restore the body's energy reserves. Then we restore the proper distribution of that energy. Only after those foundations are rebuilt do we focus on everything else. Because that's how the body was designed to heal. Inside the brain, the stroke creates a central area of damage. This is the point where the bleeding, or in the case of an ischemic stroke, the loss of blood supply, has directly injured the brain tissue. That core area may be only a centimeter or two across. Sometimes it's larger. The exact size isn't the most important thing. What's important is understanding that there are actually two different zones. First, there's the core injury, the tissue that has been directly damaged. Then there's the healthy brain surrounding it. But between those two lies something incredibly important: the injury zone. Think of it like ripples spreading across the surface of a pond after you throw in a stone. The farther the ripples travel, the weaker they become. The same thing happens inside the brain. So instead of thinking only in terms of damaged tissue and healthy tissue, we recognize three distinct regions: healthy brain, the core injury, and the surrounding injury zone. That surrounding area hasn't been destroyed. It's been suppressed. Its activity has been reduced. You could think of it as a silent zone. And that's the part we focus on during rehabilitation. The core injury may never recover completely. Some of those neurons are permanently lost. But the surrounding injury zone is often highly recoverable. If rehabilitation is done correctly, much of that silent tissue can become active again. Once that happens, the brain begins reorganizing itself. Healthy regions start taking over functions that were previously controlled by the damaged area. This is one of the brain's most remarkable abilities. It can rewire itself. It can build new neural pathways. As a result, recovery can be far greater than most people expect. In some cases, patients don't simply return to where they were before the stroke. They function even better than they did beforehand. Not because the damaged tissue came back to life, but because the brain learned a more efficient way to organize itself. That's the real goal of rehabilitation. Not simply helping someone survive, but giving the brain every opportunity to rebuild itself and recover as much function as possible. What comes next is the rehabilitation process itself. That's a much larger conversation. We would need to explain how we first restore the body's energy reserves, then normalize how that energy is distributed throughout the body. We'd need to discuss how we work with the musculoskeletal system, how we restore balance between the postural muscles and the muscles responsible for movement, how we improve joint function, and how all of these systems have to be addressed together, not as separate problems, but as one integrated whole. Every patient arrives with a different story. Our job is to understand exactly what has happened inside their body. A skilled physician has to be able to look beyond the obvious symptoms. They have to visualize what's happening beneath the surface, to identify what's still functioning well, what has become dysfunctional, what can still be recovered, and what has unfortunately been lost forever. That's the first stage of the work, a careful internal assessment. Only then can you build an effective rehabilitation strategy. Most of the patients who come to us aren't in the early stages after a stroke. Very few are. More often, they arrive months or even years later, after they've already been treated in multiple hospitals and rehabilitation centers. By that point, we're dealing not only with the consequences of the stroke itself, but also with the consequences of previous treatments. Some interventions have helped, others have created new problems. In medicine, we often talk about lost time. The longer recovery is delayed, the more difficult it becomes. That's why our methods have to be powerful enough to work even when 6 months, a year, or even longer has passed since the stroke, because meaningful recovery is still possible, provided you understand what the brain and the body actually need in order to heal.